In this video, you will learn to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. Now, when you add or subtract any two fractions, we first must rename each fraction with the least common denominator. And what we mean by that is that we need to find the least common multiple of the denominators. And then once you do that, then you can add or subtract as necessary. So here are a couple examples where we are to find the least common denominator. So example 1, we have the fractions 2/3 and 3/4. Now to find the least common denominator, what we're doing is we're looking at the denominators here, which would be 3 and 4, and we're trying to find the least common multiple of 3 and 4. So remember how to find the least common multiple. There's two ways to do this. One way is by listing out the multiples of 3 and then listing out the multiples of 4. So if you list out the multiples of 3, that would be found by counting by 3s, so like 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, etc. And then the multiples of 4, we start at 4 and then count by 4s. So 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, etc. So notice both have a common multiple of 12, and that is the least common multiple, which means that is our least common denominator. Because remember, least common denominator is the least common multiple of the two denominators. So our least common denominator would be the number 12. All right, so then later in the following slides, we'll use that least common denominator to rename each of these fractions, and then we'll add or subtract as needed. For example 2, we have the fractions 5/12 and 3/9. And we are to find the least common denominator of 12 and 9. All right, so what we do is we find the least common multiple of 12 and 9. So again, we could list out the multiples. So multiples of 12 would be 12, 24, 36, etc. Multiples of 9 would be 9, 18, 27, 36, etc. And notice they both have a common denominator, common multiple of 36. So our least common denominator would equal 36. But I want to show you the other method of finding the least common denominator. And we have done this in the past, but this is more to remind you of how to do it. So what we do, remember, is we take the numbers. So we have the number 12 and the number 9. All right, so those two numbers. And what I can do is I can write them as a product of prime numbers. So 9 you can write as 3 times 3. 12 is 3 times 4. And now 3 is prime, but 4 is composite, meaning I can break down the 4 further as a product of 2 times 2. So 9 can be written as 3 times 3. 12 can be written as 3 times 2 times 2. And then what we do once we have these written as prime, as a product of prime factors, what we do is we look at the factors we have. So we have 2's and then we have 3's. Now we take a certain number of 2's and 3's. The question is, how many of each do we take? Well, what we do is we take the one with the most. Here 12 has the most 2's with 2 of them, so we take 2 2's. And then the 3's, 9 has the most 3's with 2 3's. 12 only has 1. So we take both those 3's from the 9. So what we have is 2 2's and 2 3's that we multiply together. 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12. 12 times 3 would equal 36. So that's two different ways we can find the least common denominator. So for a lot of these, just listing out the multiples might be the simplest method. But if you have something that's more difficult, maybe a larger number or something like that, you can use this other method as well. So now putting this all together, we're going to have an actual addition problem where we have, for example, 5/9 plus 3/8. And what we need to do is we need to add them together, but to do that, we need to find the least common denominator because we need to rewrite these two fractions as something with the same denominator, because right now we cannot add, we cannot combine these. So looking at the 9 and the 8, Okay, 9 and 8. I'm going to show you that second method of finding the least common multiple. 9, you can factor down as 3 times 3. 8, we can factor down. We would have 4 times 2. 4 can break down further as 2 times 2. So 8 we can write as a product of 3 2's. So to find the least common multiple of these two numbers, the 9 and the 8, we see that there's 2's and 3's, and then remember we take the ones with the most of each. So 8 has the most 2's with 3 2's, so we take 3 2's, and then 9 has the most 3's with 2 3's, so we take 2 3's. Put it all together, and basically we're just multiplying 9, this is 9 times 8 to get 72. So the least common multiple of 9 and 8 is 72, and that's the least common multiple of your denominators. And the term we give to that is least common denominator. So our least common denominator would equal 72. So what we need to do is we need to rewrite 5/9 as something over 72. And then we'll do the same thing with 3/8 in a moment. So to do this, remember, we see that 9 times 8 gives us 72 on the bottom. So therefore, multiply the top by 8 as well. So 5 times 8 would give you 40. So 5/9 equals 40 over 72. And then do the same thing with 3/8. 3/8 equals something over 72. Well, to get from 8 to 72, we're multiplying by 9. Do the same thing on the top. 3 times 9, that would give you 27. So 3/8 can be written as 27 over 72. So what we do is we replace the 5/9 and 3/8 with 40 over 72 and 27 over 72. And now we can add because they have the same denominator. So when we can add the numerators, 40 plus 27, which gives us 67 on the top, and the denominator would be 72. All right, so 67 over 72 would be our solution. Now always check to make sure and see if we can simplify or not. And in this particular case, we cannot reduce this fraction, so this would be our final answer. Here is another example with subtraction. And here we are given 5/6 minus 1/4. So for this one, we need to first find the least common denominator of 6 and 4. And so this one, I'll show you that first method where you list the multiples. So multiples of 6 would be 6, 12, 18, etc. Multiples of 4 would be 4, 8, 12, 16, etc. Notice they both have a common multiple of 12. So that is our least common denominator. So what we need to do is rewrite 5/6 and 1/4 as something over 12. So 5/6 equals something over 12. So we need to figure out what is that new numerator. Well, 6 times 2 on the bottom gives you 12. Do the same thing on the top. 5 times 2 gives you 10. So 5/6 equals 10 over 12. And then 1/4 also can be written as something over 12. So looking at the denominator, 4 times 3 gives 12. Same thing on the top, 1 times 3, that would give 3 for the numerator. So 1/4 would equal 3 over 12. So what we do is we replace the 5/6 with the 10 over 12 and the 1/4 with 3 over 12. So now we have 10 over 12 minus 3 over 12. And what I can do is I can subtract the numerators, 10 minus 3, which would give 7. So our final answer is 7 over 12. Next, we have two more examples, each of which have mixed numbers. For example 5, we have 1 and 7/9 plus 3 and 5/6. So to add these mixed numbers together, we again need to have a least common denominator. So looking at the 7/9 and the 5/6, we need a common denominator. And so to do that, we need to find the least common multiple of 9 and 6. Multiples of 9 would be 9, 18, 27, etc. Multiples of 6 would be 6, 12, 18, etc. So notice they both have a least common multiple of 18. So our least common denominator would be 18. So what we do is we look at the 7 ninths and the 5 6, just the fraction part, and rewrite just that part as something over 18. So looking at 7 ninths, we can do 9 times 2 to get 18 on the bottom. 7 times 2 gives 14 on the top. So this can be written as 14 over 18. Same thing with the 3 and 5 6. We take a look at the fraction, the 5 over 6, and we see that 6 times 3 gives 18. Do the same thing on the top. 5 times 3 gives 15. So 5 over 6 can be written as 15 over 18. So what we can do is replace the 7 ninths with 14 over 18 and the 5 6 with 15 over 18. Now remember, when we add mixed numbers together, what we are doing is we need to add the whole number. So the 1 plus 3, that would give us 4. And then we add the fractions, 14 over 18 plus 15 over 18. 14 plus 15 is 29. So we have 29 over 18. So we have 4 and 29 over 18. Now notice again that we can take this further, because 29 over 18, that is an improper fraction. So what I need to do is write this as a mixed number, so the 29 over 18. If we divide 29 by 18, 18 goes into 29 one time, and the remainder is going to be 11. So we can write that as 1 and 11 over 18. So what we have is the 4 plus this 29 over 18 is 1 and 11 eighteenths. So our final answer is 4 plus 1, or 5, and then 11 over 18. So this is our solution to this addition problem. Example 6 is a subtraction problem with mixed numbers. And here we have 5 and 1/6 minus 4 and 1/3. So again, to add or subtract, we need a least common denominator. So looking at the 6 and the 3, we need a common denominator. So for 6, multiples of 6 would be 6, 12, 18, etc. Multiples of 3 would be 3, 6, 9, 12, etc. And notice the smallest common multiple would be 6. So that would be our least common denominator. So 6 is our least common denominator. Now the first fraction already has a 6 in the denominator, so the only thing we must do first is rewrite the second fraction as something over 6. So looking just at the 1 over 3, the fraction part, we need to write this as something over 6. Well, 3 times 2 gives 6 for the denominator, and then 1 times 2 on the numerator would give 2. So 1/3 would equal 2 over 6. So I can rewrite 4 and 1/3 as 4 and 2 over 6. And now I subtract. Now to subtract, we subtract the fractions with each other and then subtract the whole numbers with each other. But notice that 1/6 minus 2/6 does not work because 1/6 is smaller than 2/6. So what I need to do is borrow 1 from the 5, so this becomes a 4. And the one we borrow, we write as 6 over 6 and put that with the 1 over 6. So now we have 7 over 6. So what we have is 4 and 7 over 6 minus 4 and 2 over 6. When we subtract the fractions together, 7 over 6 minus 2 over 6, 7 minus 2 is 5, so we get 5 over 6, and then 4 minus 4 would give us 0. So we have 0 and 5 6, or just written as 5 over 6. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.